I'm here with the team from Mothering Sunday, the stars Josh O'Connor and Odessa Young, and the director of the film, Eva Hassan. Welcome. Thank you so much for bringing your film to the festival.
Well, thank you for bringing the movie to the festival, Cameron.
Well, let's say welcome back to you, Eva, first of all. You've been here with your two previous films, Girls of the Sun and Bang Gang. And once again, you've made a film that is beautiful and moving and hot. And I want to congratulate you on all three of those things. And maybe if you could begin by telling us a little bit about what attracted you to the Graham Swift novel that Mothering Sunday is based on.
You know, the reality is that I was working a lot when I received the script, and I was on a project that was very time consuming. And then I got this extremely delicate object that talked about emotions and, you know, the depth of the heart and what it means to be a human being and how do you overcome tragedy and loss. And, you know, and I came from a time when, you know, it was at a time when I had gone through a lot of personal loss, and it just really touched me, and I finished the novel in tears. And then I got the script, you know, and I finished the script in tears, and I just realized it just felt right. And when that happens, you just have to say yes. And I didn't quite know how to make this work or when it would happen, but I just had to do it. And so when on top of that, you know, we started to enter an era of great collective loss, it just, you know, it even made more sense to me.
Mm-hmm. This is your first film in English, and I guess it gives you suddenly a whole new raft of actors that you're working with. And I want to start with casting Odessa as Jane. Can you talk a little bit about, this is a very kind of specific character, a lot that's going on inside of her, in her mind, in terms of becoming a writer, but also it requires a kind of very expansive physical performance as well. So you're asking a lot of this actor. Why Odessa?
I had a certain idea of Jane, and I didn't know how it was going to be embodied by an actress, but I knew I wanted to have someone who could be as vulnerable as she was strong. And when I saw Odessa in Shirley, it just completely clicked with me. I was like, this is her, and it makes complete sense. And I had gone through a lot of names, and you know, it's not an easy role to cast, and I think she fulfilled the promise by, you know, 1000%. She's an incredibly intelligent actress to start with, which is great fun to work with because, you know, you argue a lot, right? But I tend to love that because that's when good things emerge, and, you know, you sort of confront your own vision to the vision that the actress has. And personally, I think it's more fun. Josh always said yes to everything.
All right, we're going to get to that in a minute because that can be dangerous with Eva.
You know what I'm talking about, right, Cameron?
Yeah, I know. Odessa, I want to ask you about taking the role of Jane Fairchild, and then also about the arguments that you were having with Eva. How did you create this character through those conversations?
Oh, such a great question. I don't know. I think honestly through the arguments. I think it's because, you know, there was something happening naturally with me, which was that I think I was internalizing Jane's kind of inability to actually have these arguments with herself or anyone around her. So when I got the opportunity to arrive to set and I would have an idea, I would go up to Eva and I would be like, you better listen to what I have to say. It was not actually that rough, but I think that it went hand in hand with just kind of feeling this like immense suppression and repression because of the, you know, kind of lack of emotional access that she'd ever had to imagining a life outside of service. And then yes, having these arguments with Eva that weren't arguments, but they were passionate and heated discussions that were about these things that were incredibly important to us. And it would often be that either of us would come to each other with an idea, and the other one would be sitting there like, yeah, and then by the end of like telling the other this idea, we'd be like, yeah, I have that written here.
We're joking about it, but it's exactly what she's saying. It was more about, one of us had an idea and the other one came up with another idea, and they were like, oh my God, that completely makes sense. We're making you think out of it, but it was not.
Right. No, but that's, I think that's how I like to work. And that's why I think I felt able to do the things that I needed to do for Jane, is because I never felt like in the entire creative process of this movie, in anybody who was involved in creative decisions, I never felt like any punches were pulled. It was a passionate affair, and it was an exciting affair, and everybody believed in it so much because we had such a great leader. And I think that, that's why, I mean, I don't know if I answered your question. I don't know if that speaks to like finding the character, but it did, to me, allow me a freedom and a fearlessness that is rare.
Mm-hmm. Josh, I want to ask you about playing the character you play in the film, because he's a man of privilege in many ways, but he's also broken, part of him by the war. And I wanted to just ask you about bringing those different parts together, the power that he has in this relationship, but also the part of him that's very, very vulnerable. We've seen you just display remarkable range, everything from God's Own Country to The Crown, of course, and many other things. But playing a character who's got very sort of almost opposite parts to him, both strong and weak, almost at the same time. How do you bring those things together?
Yeah, well, I suppose in the way that Eva just alluded to this, or Eva alluded to it with Jane. Jane has, Odessa brought this kind of like this strength of character, but also this vulnerability. And I suppose I always we went through a period, Eva and I, where we were finding lots of images to kind of reference a feeling of who Paul was. And there were lots of sort of images from like Duncan Grant and the sort of Bloomsbury set. And they all felt quite ghostly. I mean, a lot of the kind of art and photography and imagery from that period was quite ghostly. And I found that really helpful. There's one particular image of Duncan Grant I kept going back to, and it's what's kind of striking about it is that men in that time, masculinity at that time you had to be strong, and they were often the kind of the leaders, the kind of they were the people in power, and yet you had this entire generation of young men who were kind of idolized and made into heroes for fighting for something that seemingly made no sense, and a whole generation were wiped out by it. And so these young men who were left behind, I always felt with Paul that there was this great kind of confusion, which sort of, I feel like we're trying, men generally are still figuring out now. But at that time, there was this real moment of, where do we stand? Like, can we be vulnerable? Can we be vulnerable in front of women? Can we be vulnerable in front of other men? And also be, these strong kind of patriarchal figures. And so that was the juxtaposition of trying to keep up the pretense of being privileged and strong and powerful, but also, also deeply vulnerable kind of underneath, I guess.
Don't think we can hear you. I mean, I cannot hear you.
No, I can't either.
I'm sorry, I just turned off my mic for a second. I wanted to ask all of you about this intense intimacy in the film. I started by saying it's hot. It is hot, the whole film, but it's more than just that. It's not just sexual display, but there's a real sense of, just like going to the limit in your characters and in the story. They're willing to kind of risk it all, and you see that physically, but you also see it emotionally. And I imagine that takes a lot of time. It doesn't happen instantly. There must have been a lot that got you to that point where you could, as a director, show that, but also as actors show that. I wanted to maybe talk a little bit about what I see as a rare intimacy, certainly in Anglophone films. Maybe it's more common in French cinema, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you got to that point.
It's interesting. I think in the end, it comes down to frequency, like the kind of frequency you want to be open to, and you want to open up in yourself, in the actors, and in the audience. I'm certainly very interested in that kind of intimacy in life, and I think it's very moving when you see it on screen. It's not easy to get there. It's not easy to film a sex scene. It's not easy for the actors. It's not easy for the director, because you sound like an idiot like and you're like, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry. And then you have, we had masked people around. I mean, not intimate at all. But I think the three of us were very dedicated to making it happen. It's happening. and we, sorry, private joke. It's happening. And yeah, thank you, Josh. Sorry, as you can see, we got along. We just got along, and that shows on screen. And I also think that's the magic when you cast the actors. I know some directors are in confrontation with actors. I cannot do that. I'm not interested in it. It makes no sense. Life's too short. And I think there are other ways to get to that, to that target, which is, emotion. And I think, when I saw Josh in God's Own Country, I was so moved by his ability to go far. And I was so moved by, the same thing Odessa is fearless. And I felt that the three of us, we could move mountains. And the truth is, we shot, I think each scene was shot in 40 minutes or something. The actual shooting time was very short. Wow. But yeah, because we had no time. It's an indie movie. We made the most of it. But and they're heroes. They're my heroes, because what they had to go through to do this on screen is just not easy and not fun. But I think it's also to Graham's and Alice's credit, Graham Swift and Alice's Birch, because they managed to frame, sex scenes are only as moving as the way you frame them, and in terms of storytelling, and they touch us because we know all the details about those characters. And we know how important it is. For example, for Josh's character, Paul, we know how insane it is that he gets to have access to that kind of vulnerability and intimacy as a man of his era. And we know for her, maids do not have, a good position in life at that moment. But she's so sincere with, what she wants from life and what she wants with everything, that she gets what she's asking for, which is extremely rare in life. I don't know. I guess I don't know if I answered the question.
You did. And now I want to hear from Odessa and Josh what it was like for you entering into this process with Ava.
It's so funny. I mean, obviously we shot the movie a year ago, and doing press for a movie is always weird, because you have to remember kind of these details that haven't really been sitting in your mind. And it's so funny to get these questions about intimacy and specifically about the sex scenes and the nudity, and because that's not the part of the movie that I remember, that's not the kernel of the movie that I remember. Not to say that part is not impactful, but it doesn't adhere to the feeling. You know what I mean? It's not the experience of filming the sex scenes or the nudity that stick to me as the identity of the movie. And I think
that's for you, if I could ask.
What sticks to, for
What
the
is
identity of the movie?
for you? Yeah.
I mean, like, I think just loss, absolute bereavement and loss and devastation. And that's not to say that it was like a really sad and terrible time shooting this movie that was just permeated by the idea of loss. But that to me is the kernel, and it's always, that's what I think back, remembering shooting. I remember the scenes where that feeling needed to be present, because you can have the chemistry, you can have the sexuality present, and that's great. And if you don't have it present, there's still the act. Thankfully, like I think we made some nice scenes. But if you don't have the loss present or the grief present in those scenes, then there's nothing. It won't work. There's nothing to hang the scene on, So that's kind of, I find it interesting, my reaction to those questions or my memories of those questions, because it's almost as though I've forgotten that there's like that part of the movie. But in saying that, to answer the question, I think we all just made a commitment to it. I don't think any of us were standing there in the room saying, "Please help me with this." I think we got to the scene and we said, "Okay, great, here we go." Because I think as actors, we're asked to do pretty crazy stuff all the time, and nudity and sex scenes are definitely not the craziest thing I've been asked to do. So, I think that there is just like you got to go into it with a bit of a fearlessness and trust that the people that you are cohabitating the scene with are game. And yeah, I think that we had just spent so much time kind of curating this relationship between Eva and Paul. Oh, sorry, Jane and Paul. Between Eva and Paul, and Eva, but curating this relationship between all of us that we could rely on to keep us safe in those moments, and I think that's how we did it. It's not alchemy, it's not witchcraft. It's just like be a good person and respect yourself and others, and go in and do your job.
Also, I think there's something about, and it's worth remembering. I know we probably mentioned this already. But I don't know about you, Odessa, but when I first read the novel, the Graham Swift novel, there's so much about, the kind of the sexualized nature of their relationship is so important in terms of where Jane is and where Paul is. In a kind of societal sense. I suppose when we're talking earlier, Odessa was talking earlier about Jane's power, or Eva was talking earlier about Jane's power and vulnerability. And I was talking about kind of Paul's power and vulnerability, and where those elements of their personality kind of clash in kind of culturally at that time in England. And I think nudity says so much about where they are in those scenes. There's so much silence in those scenes, so much that's not said. That still exists in like British culture now. Generally people do find it incredibly difficult to say how they actually feel, and so I think actually the nudity is entirely necessary, and it's not a decision. I know for a fact that it's not a decision Odessa takes lightly, and it's not a decision I take lightly, and I'm sure it's not a decision Eva takes lightly. Those moments of nudity and vulnerability are completely attached. And so it's not something you kind of flippantly go, yeah, I'll get naked in your film. It's like, if it makes sense for the film, if it has to be there and couldn't not be there, which in a film like this, it couldn't not be there, then I think, you commit to it.
I think it's remarkable work that all of you did. And obviously not just in those scenes, but those scenes do have a kind of breathtaking courage and fearlessness that I think is as I said, rare, I think, at least in the cinema of Britain in many cases. So thank you for bringing a little French flavor to Mothering Sunday, Eva.
Doing my best.
I guess the last thing I want to ask you is just about, you said this was an independent film. It's been picked up by Sony Classic, so hopefully it does get out to a bigger audience. But given everything that's changing in the film landscape right now and the kind of film that you've made, what are your hopes for where this lands and how audiences respond to it? People are just going back to cinemas now. What's the path for a film like Mothering Sunday right now, do you think?
Well, that's always very hard to predict because, if everyone knew, we'd make, like magic movies from the get-go. But I will say this, I am absolutely sure that this movie resonates a lot with what people are going through at the moment, in terms of it's a time where all of us, like the level of trauma is at the same level as world wars, basically, in terms of, we going through personal traumas and a collective one at the same time. And it's exactly what these characters are going through. And at the same time, Odessa brought up the sense of bereavement, but the global feeling of the movie, for me, goes way beyond that. It goes about how do you survive life, and how do you hang on to the incredible, beautiful memories that life brings your way, the incredible moments of joy, and how do you experience pure intimacy and pure joy and pure grace. For me, it's a film about grace and what it means to be alive. And I cannot see how people are not going to relate to that. Is it going to have its full life on the big screen, on a smaller screen, on a 10-year, 20-year period? I don't have the answer to that. I just know it's deeply touching. And, from the reaction to the audience and a lot of people come, incredibly moved out of the screening rooms, and it's extremely beautiful to watch and great to see that, we sort of carried the torch that started with Graham. I think the movie in a way is extremely deeply satisfying as a cinematic experience. It's a movie, and that's what we tried desperately to hold on to despite the circumstances. It was really hard to make. We shot in September 2020. It was strange and weird and hard, and everything was new, but we did it, and I think some of that conviction carries the film.
Mm-hmm. It's an absolutely beautiful film. I can't wait to watch it again. So thank you all for making the film. I hope that you make more films together. I think there's some remarkable chemistry that.
Yeah, it was out there.
Good. Didn't even get a chance to ask you about Glenda Jackson, which is one of my favorite moments in the film. But I just want to thank you all for making it and for bringing it to the Toronto Film Festival. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very soon.